On the edge of town stood an old Victorian house that no one dared to enter. Its windows were like unblinking eyes, staring down the deserted street, and its creaking weather vanes sang an eerie tune with the wind. Mira, a skeptic at heart, inherited the house from an estranged uncle. She moved in, dismissing rumors about the place being haunted. She laughed at the townsfolk's warnings. Ghosts? Nonsense. The first night was peaceful until the clock struck 3 a.m. A faint whisper drifted down from the attic. Mira dismissed it as the wind and went back to sleep. The second night, the whisper grew louder. "Leave!" it hissed, stretching the word like an icy breath on her neck. On the third night, Mira decided to investigate. Flashlight in hand, she ascended the rickety attic stairs. The air grew colder with each step. The whispers turned into urgent murmurs, echoing off the wooden walls. Leave, before it's too late. At the top, she found an old, cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. The whispers seemed to be coming from it. As she approached, her reflection flickered, replaced by a shadowy figure with hollow eyes. It smiled, a smile too wide to be human. "Stay," it said, its voice dripping with malice. The flashlight flickered and Mira screamed. The townsfolk found the house abandoned the next morning. Mira was gone, but a new shadow now lingered in the old mirror, its hollow eyes watching anyone who dared to 5:10 a.m., December 31st, 2024. Irfan Khan. On the edge of town stood an old Victorian house that no one dared to enter. Its windows were like unblinking eyes, staring down the deserted street, and its creaking weather vanes sang an eerie tune with the wind. Mira, a skeptic at heart, inherited the house from an estranged uncle. She moved in, dismissing rumors about the place being haunted. She laughed at the townsfolk's warnings. Ghosts? Nonsense. The first night was peaceful until the clock struck 3 a.m. A faint whisper drifted down from the attic. Mira dismissed it as the wind and went back to sleep. The second night, the whisper grew louder. "Leave!" it hissed, stretching the word like an icy breath on her neck. On the third night, Mira decided to investigate. Flashlight in hand, she ascended the rickety attic stairs. The air grew colder with each step. The whispers turned into urgent murmurs, echoing off the wooden walls. Leave, before it's too late. At the top, she found an old, cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. The whispers seemed to be coming from it. As she approached, her reflection flickered, replaced by a shadowy figure with hollow eyes. It smiled, a smile too wide to be human. "Stay," it said, its voice dripping with malice. The flashlight flickered, and Mira screamed. The townsfolk found the house abandoned the next morning. Mira was gone, but a new shadow now lingered in the old mirror, its hollow eyes watching anyone who dared to look. Here are a few more short horror stories for bedtime. 1. The knocking. Every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., Priya heard knocking on her bedroom window. She lived on the 10th floor of an apartment building. Convinced it was her imagination, she ignored it, until the night she decided to look. Drawing the curtains aside, she froze. A pale, grinning face stared back at her from the other side of the glass. The knocking stopped, but the grin never wavered. She called the police, but when they arrived, they found no sign of anyone outside. That night, the knocking resumed. It wasn't coming from the window anymore. It was coming from her closet. Ravi had always been fascinated by trains, so when he heard about a ghost train passing through their sleepy village, he decided to see it for himself. The villagers warned him against it, but curiosity got the better of him. At midnight, he waited at the deserted station. The air turned icy as the train approached, its headlights glowing an unnatural green. It screeched to a halt, and the doors opened. Empty carriages stretched as far as the eye could see. Just as Ravi decided to leave, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. A voice whispered, "All aboard," and before he could react, he was dragged inside. The train disappeared into the night, and Ravi was never seen again. Amara moved into an old house where one door was bolted shut with heavy chains. The landlord warned her not to open it. She agreed but couldn't stop her curiosity. 5:10 a.m., December 31st, 2024. Irfan Khan. One stormy evening, she decided to break the chains. Inside, she found a dimly lit room with a single chair facing the corner. A doll sat on the chair, its lifelike eyes staring at nothing. As she turned to leave, the door slammed shut. A child's voice whispered, "Now you stay, and I'm free." The last thing she saw before the lights went out was the doll smiling at her. Sohan moved into a quiet neighborhood, perfect for writing his novel. But every night, he heard the sound of a baby crying. The strange thing was, none of the Artie came home one evening to find her roommate, Ria, sitting on the couch. They chatted for a bit before Artie went to her room. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed with a text from Ria. "Running late, we'll be home in an hour." Confused, Artie went back to the living room, but the couch was empty. The only thing left was a faint outline of where someone had been sitting, and the smell of something burning. 12. The forgotten name Rajesh began receiving letters addressed to someone named Niraj. Each envelope contained a single photograph of Rajesh, taken from different angles inside his own house. The photos got closer every day, first the window, then the living room, then the hallway. The last envelope contained a photo of him sleeping. On the back were the words, "You are Niraj now." 13. The Puppet Show. Ananya loved old things and bought an antique marionette from a flea market. That night, she woke to faint laughter and the sound of strings creaking. She found the puppet hanging in her doorway, its wooden hand raised as if waving. She locked it in the attic, but every morning it was back in her room. The last time she tried to get rid of it, the puppet's mouth opened, and it whispered, "Don't leave me again." 14. The mirror's secret, Shreya, bought a beautiful vintage mirror for her bedroom. Every time she looked into it, she felt like something was slightly off. One night, as she turned off the lights, she glanced at the mirror and froze. Her reflection didn't move. It smiled instead and whispered, "Finally, we switch." The lights flickered, and Shreya felt a cold grip on her neck. Now her reflection roams free, while she remains trapped in the glass. 15. The missing time, Akash woke up to find his phone showing a strange time. 3:33 a.m. He checked his watch. It was also 3:33. Shrugging it off, he went back to bed, only to wake up the next morning feeling groggy. When he checked his phone, the date had changed. But it wasn't the next day. 2 weeks had passed. His texts, calls, and emails from those weeks were filled with cryptic messages from himself. "Don't trust the clock." 16. The Visitor. Late one night, Kavia's doorbell rang. She looked through the peephole but saw no one there. As she turned away, the bell rang again, this time louder, more insistent. She peeked again, and this time there was a figure standing just outside the peephole's field of view. A voice whispered through the door, "I can see you." 17. The Library Book. Manoj borrowed an old, dusty book from the library. Inside, he found handwritten notes in the margins. Most were harmless, definitions and scribbles, until he reached the last page where it read, "Close the book before it sees you." Confused, he flipped the page to find a drawing of a single eye staring back. The ink bled off the page, and a cold wind swept through the room. When he looked back, the book was gone, but the sound of turning pages followed him everywhere he went. 18. The Stalker in the Rain. During a heavy storm, Priyanka was driving home when she noticed a figure standing by the roadside. It seemed to follow her car, appearing in her rearview mirror no matter how far she drove. Finally, she stopped at a gas station. As she stepped out, someone whispered in her ear, "You can't leave me in the rain." She turned around. No one was there, but the back seat of her car was wet. 19. The Whispering Dolls. Tanvi's grandmother collected porcelain dolls and kept them on a shelf in her room. At night, Tanvi could swear she heard them whispering to each other. One night, she stayed up to watch them. At exactly 3 a.m., the dolls turned their heads toward her, one by one, and said in unison, "You shouldn't be here." 20. The Empty Room. Rohini rented a cheap flat but noticed one strange thing. The corner of the living room was always ice cold, no matter how warm the rest of the house was. One night, she woke to a faint sound of breathing. When she turned on the lights, she saw wet footprints leading from the cold corner to her bed. The next day, she tried to leave, but the landlord stopped her. "You can't move out," he said. "The last tenant tried that, and they never got